Hello, welcome to our August Ventura River Watershed Council meeting. It's great to have everyone join today, especially in the summer. We have two really great presentations that are lengthy but very informative, and I'm excited to have them join us today. I'd love for us all to go over introductions first, so we'll start in the room. I'm Lauren, and I'm one of the coordinators for the Watershed Council.
I'm Heidi Ortloff. I'm a co-coordinator with Lauren for the Watershed Council.
And I'll in the room, I'll rotate the screen. So I'll start here.
Oh. Hi, everyone. So good to see people in the room. I really love it. And can't see the people online, but I'm really glad to have everybody here today on a summer day. My name is Lynn Rodriguez, and I have to be careful how I introduce myself now. The project manager for the Ventura River Watershed Resilience Pilot.
If you have any updates as well, you can feel free to include them in your introduction. I forgot to mention that. Yeah. Lynn, you kind of have the main updates.
Yeah, and I do have something kind of unrelated, but I can't remember what it is, so I'll bring it up later.
Okay. All right. Jody, you can feel free to go.
Jody Schweitzer, Water Program Director with Farm Bureau of Ventura County.
Hello, everyone. I am Gladys. I am also from the Farm Bureau.
You're a new hire.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Vivon, I believe.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Sedgwick. I'm the Restoration Program Director at the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy.
Bruce Kubler was the Ventura River Water District Board.
I'm Sarah Boulder, Water Resources.
And Janine Trudeau, Assistant General Manager at Water Resources.
Great, thank you. And then I believe now we'll have introductions from the Zoom portion, which Heidi will be calling your name, and you can introduce yourself when we call on you.
Okay, Brian Brennan, do you want to introduce yourself and any updates?
Sure, just representing Supervisor Matt Levere's office. Thank you.
Julie Clark.
I'm Julie Clark with University of California Cooperative Extension in Ventura.
Yeah. Tom Hicks.
Good morning. Tom Hicks, water rights attorney and conservation attorney, working on behalf of the Ventura County Resource Conservation District on the Ventura River In-Stream Flow or VRIF projects, and likewise representing different landowners in the Ventura watershed.
Yeah, Allegra Roth.
Hey everyone, my name is Allegra Roth. Oh, now you can see me. I am a water resources planner with Rincon Consultants, and we do a lot of environmental and watershed work throughout California, and particularly in Ventura. We're headquartered there. Excited to be here.
And Brian Bondi.
Good morning, Brian Bondi here today for Upper Ventura River Groundwater Sustainability Agency.
Elijah M.
Good morning. My name is Elijah Mantrano. I'm the fish habitat specialist over at the California Conservation Corps in Camarillo.
Amy Whiteford.
Sorry, got distracted there. My name is Jamie Whiteford. I'm interim executive director with the Ventura County Resource Conservation District. And in this context, I'm here as the lead agency for the Department of Water Resources Watershed Resilience Pilot Program. Thank you. And good morning, everyone.
Kathy Bremer.
Friends of the Ventura River.
Peter Deneen.
Hey, good morning. I'm a local writer and teacher, and I'm also the CEO and interim conservation director of Keep the Sesame Wild.
And
Keep Sesame Wild.
And Russell Marlowe.
Morning, everyone. Russell Morrow, Cal Trout, Senior Project Manager in our Ventura office, then also member of the Mid-Tillhawk Coalition as well. Thanks for putting me on.
Thank you.
Hey, since it doesn't seem like anyone has any more updates, feel free to interrupt me if you do. I'd like to start with our first presentation from Jody Schweitzer from the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. Jody, you can come up?
Yeah.
You can, it's really wherever you want. Yeah.
You can take my seat too if you want.
Yes. And I will. Okay, how does that work? Cool.
Let me just tell you next slide.
Mhm.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jody Schweitzer, Water Program Director for the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. I was trying to think back on when the last time I had talked to this group about the irrigated lands regulatory program was. Thought it had been years and years ago, but I guess it was just a year and a half ago. Just feels like a much longer period of time. At that point, we hadn't yet seen what the tentative order looked like. We still had a lot of uncertainty as to what the regulatory program is going to look like going forward. We had some concerns about things that we knew to anticipate, but weren't quite sure how they were going to play out. So now the ag order has been adopted, happened last September, and I can talk a little bit more in detail about what those requirements look like. But because this is a program that I know a lot of people aren't nearly as familiar with as I am, I'm going to start with some regulatory background, a little bit of talk about what VCALG is and what we do, what our monitoring program looks like, what the data is looking like at kind of a high level. And then I'll talk about some of the program elements that are going to continue and some of the program elements that are significantly changing. Next slide. So starting first at the state level with what the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program is. This is overseen by the State Water Resources Control Board, and then each of the corresponding 9 regional water quality control boards adopt their own order to implement the requirements of that program. So the names of these orders might be different from region to region. In our region, it had previously been called a conditional ag waiver. Now we have a WDR or something that we just call an ag order. Other regions will have a variation of that. There's a lot of similarities between those programs though. One of those is that they all apply to growers who irrigate commercial crops. And then they regulate water that discharges into surface water, and that could be irrigation tailwater or stormwater flowing off the fields, as well as what's leaching below the root zone into groundwater, with the overarching goal to control and prevent contaminants to protect the beneficial uses of those water bodies and groundwater basins. And then another important thing that each of the programs throughout the state have in common is that growers have 2 options to comply. They can either join a third-party coalition, which helps them do all of the monitoring on a collective level for all agriculture, or they can do it on their own, in which case they would do all of their own monitoring and all of their own reporting to the regulatory agency. So for Ventura County, that third-party coalition is the Ventura County Agricultural Irrigated Lands Group, which is a mouthful in what we just call VCALG. And it was established in 2006, and it's administered by the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what VCALG is. So our role is to assist growers in complying with the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. We're not enforcement. We're not looking at any individual farmers' compliance. That is the regional board's role. We are implementing a representative monitoring program that I'll talk about in a moment here, as well as some other responsibilities. So we manage the group enrollment. We do all of the water quality monitoring and special studies as those are needed. We develop the water quality reports and the plans, and then we implement the education and outreach program to communicate to growers, what we're seeing in water quality and what management practices they would need to implement to mitigate those exceedances. VCALG is overseen by a 17-member steering committee. So this is primarily growers who operate in each of the 3 main watersheds of the county, but also some water agencies and other folks who are involved in the agricultural industry. All the work we do is funded by a per acreage assessment. So every grower pays into the program based on how many irrigated acres of production they have. So they're paying their fair share for what their the size of their operation is. And then a couple of enrollment statistics. So right now we're close to 78,000 irrigated acres enrolled in the program. And that's about 88% of the irrigated acreage in the county. And that accounts for over 1,200 landowners, which is about 74% of the landowners in the county. And the difference between those two percentages tells you that for the majority, the unenrolled landowners are going to be your smaller operations. So we have most of the acreage enrolled, but less of the landowners enrolled. Slide, please. And then really quick, just kind of explaining how this program has evolved over time. So the first conditional waiver was adopted in 2005. And one thing about conditional waivers themselves is they're only allowed to span a 5-year term. So they expire at the end of 5 years. They have to be reevaluated and renewed. So the conditional waiver terms went in 5-year increments. 2010, the second conditional waiver was adopted. And one of the new requirements that was incorporated there was TMDLs. So this is when we had to expand the monitoring program to implement all of the TMDL monitoring that we do in addition to the kind of we call the general VCAL monitoring. And then in 2016, this was a significant change to the program. This is the third conditional waiver term being adopted. And there were quite a few things incorporated there. Increased focus on groundwater. So there were some groundwater trends monitoring and source investigation studies that we had to do for groundwater. Source investigation studies for surface water as well for areas where there were increasing trends. And there were only a few of these in the lower Cayugas watershed. I think we had 3 watersheds with slightly increasing trends for nutrients, toxaphene, and dissolved copper. And then there were compliance states added for those TMDLs. So it was more than just monitoring for the TMDL constituents. Now there were compliance states that those load allocations had to be met by. And I'm going to talk more about TMDLs in a minute too. And then lastly, nitrogen management plan requirements were added in that applied in certain watersheds. So watersheds where there were surface water impairments for nutrients, or watersheds where you had a nutrient TMDL that mandated nutrient management plans like the Ventura River Watershed. So all growers in the Ventura River Watershed were required to have a nitrogen management plan on farm by, I believe it was 2019. And then in September 28th of last year, the ag order was adopted. So that included everything that had come before it, but 2 additional significant program changes as well. So that is the statewide precedential nitrogen tracking and reporting requirements, and then TMDL driven requirements as those deadlines come due. And I'll talk more in detail about those in a couple of slides. So the VCAL monitoring program, throughout each of the conditional waiver or ag order terms, this representative monitoring program has been the foundation of the irrigated lands regulatory program. We have 25 monitoring sites throughout the county. The color here indicates the function of that monitoring site. So if it's green, it means we monitor for a whole long list of constituents that I'll show you in a second. If it's yellow, it means we're only monitoring for the TMDL specific constituent. So maybe it's only nutrients or only legacy pesticides or only bacteria, whatever is driven by that TMDL. And the way that this functions is each of these delineated responsibility areas you see here that are numbered, that is the area of land that's being represented by that internal monitoring site. So whatever we see at that monitoring site, exceedance wise, that drives the recommendations for management practices for everybody in that responsibility area. And we select those monitoring sites so that they are collecting agricultural runoff to the greatest extent practicable to really kind of separate that out from any other interferences like wastewater treatment plants or MS4 discharges, and that it is draining an area of land that has a crop type distribution that's similar to the distribution throughout the larger area. And these responsibility area delineations that you see here are what was in place under the conditional waiver that just expired. And we will be redrawing these lines slightly. And I'll talk about why we'll be doing that. We've already done it and submitted to the regional board. It just has to be approved before it's finalized. Next slide. So in the Ventura River watershed specifically, we have 3 monitoring sites. One on San Antonio Creek at Grand Avenue, one on Thatcher Creek at Ojai Avenue, and those are both in the upper portion of the watershed. And then the lower portion of the watershed, we have an agricultural drainage channel monitoring site at Reach 2 as it enters Ventura River. And the agriculture that those 3 monitoring sites are representing includes 2,653 acres of agricultural land. So this is the acreage that is enrolled in VCALC. And that accounts for 74% of the irrigated acreage in the watershed. So 74% of the acreage is enrolled in VCALC currently. And then the crop types that represents, orchards, about 94%, strawberries, 3%, and then we've got a really small amount of grapes, row crops, nurseries, raspberry, cut flower, and hay. Primarily it's orchard. And I think these numbers are actually a little high. I think the orchard percentage is actually a little higher than 94%. If we had a higher enrollment percentage, we'd see a higher orchard percentage too. Probably closer to 97% orchard. So at the 2 upper watershed monitoring sites, San Antonio Creek and Thatcher, we are monitoring for this full list. So general field parameters, flow, pH, temperature, DO, turbidity, conductivity, as well as some water quality constituents, TDS, TSS, hardness, fluoride, sulfate, and then all of your nutrient parameters. So total ammonia, nitrate as nitrogen, phosphate, pesticides. There are, under the conditional waiver requirements, which is what we're still implementing right now until our new monitoring reporting plan is approved, we have 3 suites of pesticides that we're analyzing for. So the organochlorine pesticides, your OC pesticides, those are the legacy stuff. So that's like DDT and toxaphene and pesticides that haven't been used for 50 or 60 years, but are persistent in the environment, which was the problem with those pesticides. Your organophosphorus pesticides, pyrethroid pesticides, and then as soon as the new monitoring and reporting plan is approved, we'll start monitoring for neonicotinoid pesticides as well. And then metals, so dissolved copper is the metal that is a constituent of concern for agricultural discharge, trash, bacteria, and aquatic chronic toxicity. And then last comment on that really quick is we're monitoring these 2 times during the dry season and 2 times during the wet season. And then what those monitoring results are showing us. So for the most part, we have almost no flow during dry weather. I say almost no flow. We had 2 anomalous summers the past 2 years, where we just had some high baseline flows. So we actually were able to collect dry weather samples for the first time in years and years. Having no dry weather flows is a good indication of efficient irrigation during dry weather, though. So that's always a good sign to not have those flows during dry weather. It's just because of the really heavy wet years that we've had dry flows this past earlier this summer. And storm flows consistently show exceedances for really 2 categories of constituents: legacy pesticides, so DDT, and then the breakdown chemistries of DDT, which are DDD and DDE, as well as E. coli. And one thing to note here for the legacy pesticides is that water quality benchmark. So these are in, it's essentially 0.8 micrograms per liter, or nanograms per liter, actually. So it's showing here in micrograms per liter, but if you move that decimal point over, it'd be 0.84 nanograms per liter for DBV. So these are incredibly low benchmarks, which is actually lower than the laboratory can detect. So this is why whenever they are detected, it's an expense. And these kinds of pesticides bind to soil particles. So when you have high rain events where you have any sort of sediment migration, you're going to see exceedances for it. And E. coli is also just a very prevalent issue during wet weather everywhere. When I had given this presentation before, some folks asked to see data, so I included a couple of plot charts here for you. So this is on the left, we've got DDT at San Antonio. On the right, we've got DDE at Thatcher. You can see the red line, which is essentially set at 0. And when we do have exceedances, other times we have some instances of non-detect. So those are the results for legacy pesticides, and the next one should be bacteria. Plotted here as well. So you can see when we have high storm events that kind of correlate with each other, we have exceedances for bacteria. Where we have occasional exceedances for nutrients, nitrate as nitrogen. The water quality benchmark for those in the upper portion of the watershed is 5 milligrams per liter, and that's as a concentration for wet weather. For dry weather, it's calculated as a load, so it's a little bit more variable. For the lower portion of the watershed, it's 10 milligrams per liter, and we have had 1 exceedance in the upper watershed since 2019, so in the last 5 years, and 1 exceedance in the lower portion of the watershed as well. So those are very occasional. For the most part, we are meeting those benchmarks pretty consistently. And then where we are always meeting benchmarks are for current use pesticides. I included chlorpyrifos on this, even though it's no longer used, just because it's more recently banned. So we do have some monitoring data for the last couple of years when it was used, and we still always met those water quality benchmarks. And then for pyrethroid, for bifenthrin as well, always meeting that. And then for the last 5 years, we've added glyphosate to our list of analytes. We're not required to under the ag order, but just due to kind of community concern for that particular herbicide, we had added that. So we've been monitoring for 5 years and have never seen that at any of our monitoring sites. Aquatic chronic toxicity as well. So we are always meeting the requirements for survival and reproductive toxicity. Salt copper is always meeting, and salts is always meeting as well. So what we do with those monitoring results is it drives this iterative process that has been the foundation of the irrigated lands regulatory program since the beginning. And this is an element of the program that is going to continue. And I'll talk in a second about just another layer that's been added onto this, how this next layer is going to be introduce some significant change to the program. So the iterative process is essentially to implement management practices to the degree necessary to meet standard water quality benchmarks. So whenever we do have an exceedance for a water quality constituent, VCALC provides recommendations of management practices that would mitigate that particular constituent and makes referrals to technical service providers. So that would be the USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service or the RCD or UC Cooperative Extension, who can really work with growers to help implement management practices. But ultimately, the grower is going to decide what works best for their individual farm or ranch. And the way that this iterative process goes is that we start by sampling to characterize the existing water quality conditions. Then we develop a water quality management plan, which is the roadmap for meeting those water quality standards. So we're able to say, what additional level of management practice implementation is going to be required in order to meet water quality standards. We do education outreach to growers to talk to them about what those water quality issues are. talk to them about those recommended management practices that would mitigate those issues, and then to connect them with those service providers. And then we evaluate. So we conduct management practice surveys every couple of years, every 2 to 3 years, where we are asking on a parcel level a whole long list of questions about what types of management practices each grower is implementing on their farm. And so we're able to aggregate this data together. We're able to look at what our water quality trends are looking like at our monitoring site and see, is what growers are doing currently enough to meet water quality standards, or is there more that needs to be done? And if there's more that needs to be done, then that would drive the update of that water quality management plan. And we sample again to be able to evaluate what's effective. There are backstops to this iterative process, and those backstops come in the form of TMDL driven requirements. So I'll talk really quickly just about what TMDLs are for anybody who's unfamiliar. A TMDL is a total maximum daily load, and this is a watershed specific plan to restore the beneficial use of an impaired water body. So the easiest way to think of it is this additional regulatory layer that applies in areas that are draining to an impaired water body. So we've got the general irrigated lands regulatory program, and then these TMDL driven requirements apply on top of that in these specific areas. And in a TMDL, each source type that discharges the constituent of concern is assigned an allocation. So for the Ventura River algae TMDL, you have irrigated cropland as a source type. You have municipal discharges as a source type, wastewater treatment plants as a source type, septic systems as a source type, horse and livestock facilities as a source type. Each of those separate source types are assigned an allocation of nutrients that they can contribute and still have the water body meet its beneficial use standards. The key for a TMDL is that it has to be incorporated into a water quality permit or an order in order to be enforced. So TMDL is being incorporated into the ag order is its enforcement mechanism. TMDLs are then incorporated into the MS4 permits. That's how they're enforced there. There are some source types that don't have a permit that applies to them. So that would be septic, and that would also be horse and livestock facilities. So these are kind of two source categories that have allocations, but there's no kind of regulatory or enforcement mechanism for those at this time. And those load allocations must be met by the compliant state that's dictated to that particular source type. And sometimes these are consistent across source types, and sometimes they vary. Horse and intensive livestock are a source type in the TMDL, but there's no regulatory order that applies to them. The regional board's been in development of a conditional waiver for those source types for 8+ years, many years. I don't think I've heard an update on it in the last 5 years or so. It's been quite a while.
Okay, so that would need to be incorporated in some kind of.
They would need a conditional waiver to be adopted with the TMDL incorporated into it in order to have any sort of enforcement mechanism.
But it's separate.
It's separate from, irrigated cropland, or I can't remember exactly how it's spelled out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Those are two separate ones in there.
Do you have any idea of the relative magnitude of the livestock and horses load versus the irrigated land?
Oh,
Or like, is there
I can't remember off the top of my head. I want to say it was more than irrigated lands, but don't quote me on that.
probably, I just wondered.
Yeah. And septic also is up there.
When thinking our watershed, the livestock is concerned. There's not as many strawberries, other, row crops. That could be that, but there are a lot of heavily intensive livestock.
I want
We had
to.
done a study on that, years ago, and obviously that led to the out to TMDL, and yeah, I heard that.
I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, the last time there was a meeting of horse facility operators and regional board staff. It was Jenny Newman and Snejana presented at that with an update. That's about the last time I heard an update on it.
Yeah, they're supposed to be doing BMPs, and it seems like some facilities have, you know, incorporated BMPs, and others just looking at it. But
so what those TMDL compliance states look like for irrigated agriculture. This is a full list of TMDLs that apply throughout the county. So lots of information on this slide, but this first kind of light blue area are the 2 TMDLs that apply in the Ventura River watershed. So we've got the LG TMDL and the trash TMDL that applies in the estuary. And then there's a column here for the compliance state that was in place under the conditional waiver. And then some of those dates changed in the ag order. So they all went backwards, if anything. Some of them went back 10+ years or so. And that was really an issue of a court case that had happened based on a different region where the state board weighed in on the method of changing compliance states. And a while back, those compliance states had been changed in the conditional waiver. So the regional board had to revert them back to what existed in the basin plan. So that's why those compliance states changed. But one thing, just really quick here, as you can see by the dates, these are all things that just recently came due and passed or will be coming due very soon. There's only a couple that haven't yet come due, a couple of 2025 and 2026 dates for some lower Cayugas, legacy pesticides, and I think bacteria for dry weather. Or wet weather, I'm sorry, St. Clair River 2029. So that was a ways off. So how those TMDL driven requirements have changed. I think this slide's important because the perspective you're coming at it from, they're going to feel very different. From the regional board's perspective, these are continuing requirements that existed in the conditional waiver, but they were never implemented. So similar TMDL driven requirements were included in the 2016 conditional waiver, but a couple of reasons why they were never implemented. Many of those compliance states hadn't come due until recently, so there was nothing to be triggered. But most importantly, in the conditional waiver, the requirements were tied to the encompassing and adjacent HUC 12 subwatershed rather than the TMDL boundary. And one thing that I don't think was fully understood until somewhat recently is that these two area delineations don't overlap for many areas. So we had instances where if you were to apply the requirements to the HUC 12 subwatershed, you would be applying TMDL requirements outside of TMDL boundaries, outside of the watershed draining to those water bodies. And that posed a significant legal quandary. So due to that uncertainty and how and where those requirements applied, there was never any process developed by the regional board for identifying landowners who would be subject to the requirements or initiating those requirements. So really, we could only ever at that time talk about these requirements in generalities to say, here are the compliance states, when these come due, individual monitoring would be triggered for these growers, but we couldn't say which areas or which growers that would apply to. So we worked a lot with the regional board and the development of the ag order to clarify those requirements. And these new requirements that were adopted in the ag order are different in a couple of key ways. First is that they apply now within TMDL boundaries. So did away with the HUC 12 subwatershed issue. Now they are applying within the boundaries themselves. The only kind of hurdle there was that many of these TMDL boundaries hadn't been mapped. So some of the TMDLs were developed many years ago when there wasn't GIS mapping or they hadn't done any sort of GIS mapping. So these maps existed on paper, but there was no actual GIS file in order to identify on a discrete level where properties would be that would be subject to those requirements. We have those boundaries now. That process was finalized late February, early March of this year. So it took a couple months after the ag order adoption. Once we got those boundaries, then we were able to do a mapping exercise to say, we have these numbers of monitoring sites within these boundaries, and then the regional board applied their discretion to delineate those areas. So now we will have new responsibility areas that are aligned with TMDL boundaries. And it will be a straightforward and clear process to say, if you are within this area, you are subject to these TMDL driven requirements. And this is the specific monitoring site that we will evaluate whether those load allocations are being met or not. I already talked about some of the compliance states. The other significant change is that there's an additional compliance option now. So the requirements that were written into the 2016 conditional waiver, even though they never were able to be implemented, they were written in a way that said they would trigger edge of field monitoring for every grower in that Cup sub-watershed. So there was only an individual monitoring compliance pathway. And one of the issues that we worked with the regional board the most, and also a lot of other stakeholders, other partner agencies, lots of NGOs as well, to talk to them about what the most effective compliance framework would be, for a regulatory framework would be for areas where there are water quality impairments. Our perspective on that was that individual monitoring, just doing edge of field sampling everywhere, wasn't going to solve water quality issues. It would lead to just enormous sampling effort that we don't have the lab capacity to analyze for. The regional board doesn't have the staff capacity to oversee. It would also erode VCALG as a coalition, because if everybody's sampling at the edge of their field, what function or benefit does VCALG then serve? Which also kind of erodes some of the partnerships that VCALG has with municipalities and other agencies and organizations throughout the county to work on water quality issues. So we had a lot of concern about individual monitoring being the only compliance pathway. And also, if implementation of management practices is what's needed to address water quality, then we should have an implementation focused pathway. So we had put together a proposal, worked extensively with other stakeholders to revise that proposal, and worked with the regional board to get this adopted into the ag order. So the requirements under the ag order are as follows. When there is a TMDL water quality exceedance at the representative monitoring site, the growers in that responsibility area being represented by the exceeding monitoring site, they would select one of two compliance pathways. So they can either do individual monitoring, which is still an option available to anybody, and it would be the default compliance pathway if they don't make a choice. So in this scenario, the grower would submit a field-specific monitoring and reporting plan for edge of field sampling. Sampling would be initiated that following wet and or dry season and continue until you have no exceedances for 2 years. Results would be reported annually by the grower to the regional board. And then they would have to resample every 5 years. So after you get to a point where you don't have exceedances for 2 years, you would still have to resample every 5 years to prove that you continue to meet those load allocations. Or they can choose track 2, which is the implementation focused pathway. And they would have to opt into this. And in this pathway, a grower works with the technical service provider to develop and submit a farm level management practice plan that's specific to the constituent in that TMDL. So if it's nutrients, that plan is specific to nutrients, or legacy pesticides, or bacteria, whatever it is. They would have to implement that plan according to required timelines in the ag order. And this is probably our most significant challenge because these required timelines are incredibly short. So the regional board requires that these management practice plans include structural management practices. So we're talking like detention basins or denitrifying bioreactors, or engineered wetlands, something that is structural. Structural management practices require permits, they require engineering, they require construction activities and funding and all of that. And the timelines for these are very short. For a, I have my notes. For a vegetated management practice, there are 5 months to implement that. So that could be cover crop or grassed waterway. And 5 months could be challenging because this is a seasonal based practice. You have to establish that vegetative practice during the right time of year. So 5 months might not get you to that point. If it is a structural non-treatment, so detention basin, whatnot, there are 8 months to install that. So significant permitting challenges and construction challenges there. If it's a regional project, so you're working with other growers or you're working with partner agencies like an MS4, there are 15 months to between your plan approval and when that project has to be completed. There is an opportunity to request additional time, but then this goes to a public review and comment process that just haven't dealt with yet. So we're not sure how that would play out. The last point I have here for track 2 is that once a grower chooses this, they implement their management practice plan. Those plans could be required to be updated and revised within 60 days of notice by the regional board, but no sooner than 2 years after submittal. So the idea here is that if a monitoring site is exceeding for a TMDL constituent and the growers who choose track 2 are implementing their plan, 2 years have gone by and we haven't seen improvement at that monitoring site, then the regional board could require those plans to be updated and revised to include additional management practices. Oh, and then one thing I just want to mention here too is, so I had said that a grower has to work with the technical service provider. So this is really kind of the key here. It's not a grower developing their own plan. It's a grower working with a very specific list of qualified professionals. So somebody from the USDA's National Resource Conservation Service or the RCD or essentially a hydrologist or engineer or somebody who meets the qualifications listed in the ag order, they have to work with the grower to sign off on this plan. So it's something that they are working with these experts in their field to really develop something that is going to work.
Have you had any of these cases compared?
Yes, so only one. Because of the TMDL boundary issue I noted, we haven't finalized those areas. There's only one example of a watershed where the compliance date came due and the TMDL boundary was already established, and that's the McGrath Lake subwatershed. So it's a really small subwatershed draining to McGrath Lake. I believe there are 7 landowners or in that watershed. So that's the only area that has triggered these requirements where they've had to choose track 1 or track 2.
And which track did they choose?
We had a couple of each. Yeah, some folks chose track 1, and so they chose track 1 because they have a detention basin or they've altered their drainage where they no longer drain to McGrath Lake. So by choosing track 1, we're able to say we could sample any drainage that goes to McGrath Lake, but we don't have any. So we'll just choose track 1 and then attest every year that there is no drainage that's going to that water body.
Brad, like it's a problem. So,
Yeah.
so haven't solved the problem.
Well, and so this is only for the land that's draining to it. So there is one of the challenges I think we're going to have is that when the regional board mapped out these TMDL boundaries, it's mapped at kind of a coarse scale, and there is re-engineering of drainage that happens over time where you're going to have areas that are encompassed within this mapped area that actually don't drain to this water body. They've now rerouted their drainage straight over here.
So the regulatory pathway is not solving the issues regarding water quality, discharge legal.
No, but I think you would also want to say if it's rerouting its drainage to a different area that's not impaired for that particular constituent, then it's not contributing to a water quality issue.
But it's not water.
We have monitoring executive. Yeah. Yeah, but actually, so the Santa Clara River estuary is subject to a toxaphene TMDL. And so toxaphene is another legacy pesticide again. So that one's going to be coming due, I think, the next year or two. So that'll be kind of another step that any of these landowners will take there. Okay, so moving on from the TMDL driven requirements. Okay. The next significant program element, this is kind of the second of the two that I've been talking about. So TMDL driven requirements, and then these precedential requirements for nitrogen tracking and reporting. This is totally brand new. So the precedential requirements, these came from the East San Joaquin waste discharge requirements that was adopted by the State Water Resources Control Board in 2018. And in this WDR, they said this whole long list of requirements are now going to be precedential for every irrigated lands program in the state. And they have to implement them or incorporate them into their regulatory orders within 5 years. And so what these new requirements focus on is addressing nitrogen in surface and groundwater through comprehensive irrigation and nutrient management programs, which include groundwater quality trend monitoring, irrigation and nutrient management plan development, irrigation and nutrient management plan summary reporting, which we actually call irrigation and nutrient management reports, INMRs, on-farm drinking well sampling, and the development of groundwater protected formulas, values, and targets. And I'll talk about just a couple of these here. So the first one with groundwater quality trends monitoring, it's actually something that we had been doing under the 2016 conditional waiver anyways. So this is going to be a continuation program element for us. Most of the other stuff is totally new, but this one we'll be able to just continue implementing it. What we do here is we work with other agencies throughout the county who are already out there sampling wells and collecting nitrate data. So the county, United Water Conservation District, IAGUS. I think we also get some data from Division of Drinking Water, Drinking Water. And we put all of that together and are put together kind of a comprehensive look of what groundwater trends for nitrates are looking like in our groundwater basins. And as you can see here, the map looks pretty good. Anywhere that you see a blue icon, so this is either non-detect or up to 2 milligrams per liter. And the standard we're looking at is 10. So 10 milligrams per liter is the drinking water standard. Anything in any of the green icons, those are 2 to 5 milligrams per liter. Yellow is 5 to 10. And orange is 10 to 25. And we have just a couple of orange ones. And then red is over 25. And we don't have any red. So for the most part, we have a few areas where we know we have some issues, the El Rio area, especially when we don't have a lot of groundwater infiltration in that area. We tend to get nitrate exceedances. But most of the wells are looking pretty good and complying with that standard.
But go back, you see a lot of yellow in our groundwater basins here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a study that the county environmental health did a couple of years back where they did a nitrate trends isotope tracing study to look at what the source of nitrate in both groundwater and surface water was. And they were looking essentially at, is it coming from a synthetic fertilizer source or a human or an animal source, which could be septic as humans or also livestock. And that was almost entirely coming from an animal source. So septic or livestock. We had also, as VCALB, we had done a similar using that same methodology study in the Fillmore Basin. So we had a couple of wells in the Fillmore Basin that are 10 to 25 milligrams per liter, where we did that same nitrate isotope tracing study, and we're getting signatures of animal sources as well. These are both areas where we have a lot of septic. So that's potentially a contribution. And then the irrigation and nutrient management plans and reports. So the plan is an active planning document that all growers throughout the county. So no longer is it this nitrogen management plan that only is required for growers in certain watersheds. Now these requirements apply everywhere to every grower in the county, and also every grower in the state, essentially, as these new requirements roll into each region's orders. And for our region, the deadline is March 1st, 2025. So everybody needs to have their first INMP developed by March 1st of next year. And then that gets updated every year. And the way that the INMPs work is there's one INMP developed per management unit. So a management unit would be the same crop, the same age, and the same management practices. So if it's an orchard, it's pretty straightforward that it's, your block of trees that are the same age and that you're irrigating and fertilizing them the same. If you are a rotational vegetable grower where you have rotations of celeries to peppers or cilantro, it gets much more complicated as you have these kind of temporal separations of your management units and also footprint separations. For growers in the Ventura River watershed, because we're primarily talking about orchards, it will be a little bit more straightforward.
Question about, there's some existing nutrient management plans in the county that probably big, large areas. How do those fit in? I mean, some of them may be further old now, but is that still, I guess that's a point in time, but it also outlined your implementation, I think.
What would that look like?
Nutrient management plans were done, I think as required or got funded by the regional board for Ventura River.
Is this addressing like nutrient contributions from all different sources?
But it's like a big scale, supposed to farm by farm. So I'm just curious. I think we have two of them. There's one in Cayugas, I think, and one in, and they were funded by, we got money from IRWM funding to do the one in Cayugas. But and maybe there's one in Sparks.
Let's chat about that because I'm interested to see it.
It's not irrigation and nutrients,
yeah,
just nutrients.
And I don't think it would address this particular requirement because what's required here is it's very crop specific and it's very field specific. So there is a pre-season component here where you have to anticipate how much irrigation and nutrient your crop is going to need over the upcoming growing season. And then there's a post-season component here where you kind of true up. Say at the end of the year, how much fertilizer or compost or irrigation water did I actually apply? And a key thing here is that the pre-season portion of this, so your plan, has to be certified. And that certification can come from either a grower who self-certifies. They have to attend a 6-hour training class that we partner with the California Department of Food and Agriculture to put on. And we have one coming up on August 29th and 30th. So 3 hours each day. And then there's a test they have to take afterwards. So once they pass that, then they can self-certify their own plan. Or they have to work with NRCS or a certified crop advisor to certify the plan for them. So after you have your plan, then there's the reporting aspect of it. And this is really where things change because the nitrogen management plan requirements that were implemented under the 2016 conditional waiver, it was developed this on-farm nutrient management plan and you just have to have it on farm. The regional board can ask to see it at any time, but there was no reporting component to it. Now that plan has grown, it is included in an irrigation component. And it also includes a reporting component. So the following year after you develop your plan, so by March 1st through 2026, and then every year thereafter, you'll have to report summary information from your INMP. And so that will include irrigation and nutrient management practices. It'll include the total nitrogen that you applied per management unit. So you'll add together, I applied this much fertilizer, this much compost, and then this much irrigation water, and this was the nitrate concentration of my irrigation water. So adding that all together, you'll have a total nitrogen pounds per acre per management unit. And then you'll also report your harvest yield. So I harvested so many tons of oranges per acre. And there's a nitrogen removal coefficient that gets applied to that harvest yield. So we'll be able to say for each ton of oranges, this many pounds of nitrogen is in that ton of oranges. And then you'll be able to have a total nitrogen applied and a total nitrogen removed from a mulch unit, with the kind of overarching goal to get those two numbers to be as close as possible. All of that summary information is reported to VCALC, anonymized, and then submitted to the regional board every year. And the goal of this reporting program is to identify outliers. So VCALC will consider a range of A minus R, so applied minus removed per acre per crop type. So we'll be looking at like just oranges and plot that on a distribution curve to see who was an outlier in terms of how much nitrogen they applied versus removed. And those folks would first receive notification. So getting that notification is good feedback to say, if you are an outlier, you need to take a closer look at your irrigation and nutrient management program. And then also they would need to attend targeted education specific to irrigation and nutrient management practices. And we'll also use that data to develop groundwater protective formulas, values, and targets over the next years. Included in the precedential requirements, I think this is my last slide before I wrap up, is also an on-farm drinking well sampling requirement. So growers who have an on-farm drinking well on their property should have just received a letter from the regional board that directed them to sample their well before September 28th of this year and have it analyzed for nitrate as nitrogen. So if the nitrate plus nitrite as nitrogen concentration exceeds 10 milligrams per liter, then they have to give a notice to all of the users of that well, as well as send a copy to the regional board within 10 days of getting those lab results back. And there is a template for that and guidance and lots of FAQs and all kinds of stuff on the regional board's website that I'm happy to point anybody to. And then if the results are less than 8 milligrams per liter for 3 consecutive years, then that sampling frequency can be reduced to every 5 years. And to wrap up, so it's been 10 months since the ag order was adopted. We still have a lot of questions, a lot of things that we need the regional board's interpretation on, direction on how to implement from the regional board, but we continue to work with their staff regularly with monthly and as needed meetings as well to clarify those requirements. And we're really kind of working down this list and getting a much clearer picture of what the outlook of this program is going to look like, and also what the implementation is going to look like. We're still awaiting approval of that updated monitoring and reporting plan. So the most important thing in that is these revised responsibility areas, because then we'll really be able to do outreach to growers in a very specific level. Say like, you are within this responsibility area. This is the site that's representing you. Here are the TMDL dates that are going to apply to you so you can start planning and getting a head start, or also just being ready for when you would get a notification of that. So that's going to be a very significant point in the program. And then our focus over the next year is outreach to growers as soon as we get that approved. Implementation of this new monitoring and reporting program, where we'll have some new constituents to analyze for, a couple of monitoring sites that are new as well. Later this year, we'll be developing an updated water quality management plan. So we'll be looking at what groundwater or what surface water trends are looking like, what implementation levels of management practices are, and what new needs to be done or expanded in order to meet water quality objectives. Lots of grower meetings for education, meetings, trainings coming up in the next month for growers. And then building lots of tools and programs to help everybody implement these requirements. So we're building this new database that we're calling Clearwater, and it'll be a portal for growers to log in, to be able to see every parcel they have enrolled in the program, to be able to see what's required for every parcel, what the compliance dates are, whether they've submitted what they need to submit. So it'll give them, are you all green check marks across the board, or is there anything that you're not compliant on? And just a really important tool to give feedback to growers and help them understand some of these really complicated new requirements. So lots of work to be done. Any questions?
I think this is all done.
We hired Gladys.
Do you have any idea what growers cost for this, their total operation? I mean, there are comments about growers facing increased competition for international products and stuff like that. It's hard to become a grower. You're like 1% or 2% or 0.5% or do you have any idea?
So the regional board does conduct a cost analysis as part of their staff report when they adopt a new regulatory order. So there was a staff report for the ag order, and it looked specifically at these TMDL driven requirements to say, what would compliance cost? Some of their cost estimates for lemons, that was one of the most alarming one. It was 7% of gross income, and lemons are already in the red. And they cost more to harvest them than to sell them, and for many seasons recently. So that kind of a cost would be detrimental to that particular crop type. So yeah, significant concerns about the cost and whether, especially some of, certain commodity types that are already facing more pressure than others would be able to sustain these costs, along with other regulatory pressures.
That probably applies to mixes or I'm just pleased 94% of orchards. So that's
yeah, and that's why, I mean, working with like partners like RCD and trying to bring in as much grant funding as we possibly can is critical, so that, if a grower chooses track 2, we have a program that's able to offer financial assistance for them. And we've been working with the regional board to try to get 319H grant funding. Got a couple applications in for that, but I think RCD has some funding, but our big concern is that if these requirements apply to every grower in the county, which they essentially will for one constituent or another, because there are so many TMDLs that apply, everybody is going to need assistance and everybody's going to need funding, and the bandwidth is going to be stretched.
If you have a question for our Zoom participants, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Any other questions for break?
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
So that picture right there really tells the story. Maybe, that's pretty typical throughout the Oxford.
Okay. Yeah, this is obviously not Ventura River.
Yeah, and it's different from what we're talking about in this watershed. But you said earlier that there had been some BMP programs, that type of thing, but I still see that pretty much everywhere. Are there bigger incentive programs or federal grants or any kind of, options to help growers? I mean, a lot of these growers might not know or even care that is an issue, but I just feel like the regulatory process is not really been very effective in addressing this. It's been about 25 years, and we're still looking at that. If the drain, just like that, it drains right into Ventura Harbor. So I'm just wondering if there's another way to kind of look at this. If there was a real effort to try and modify that with incentive programs that would be interesting. I
think one significant challenge that we have, so looking at kind of a drainage channel like this, where we have those, dirt banks, you have a lot of regulatory conflict between food safety requirements and water quality requirements. Food safety requirements you would fail an inspection if you had like a large vegetated area adjacent to a field that's a vector habitat that would contribute or contaminants within your crop.
So you don't want anything living anywhere near the field. You gotta sterilize it with methyl bromide or whatever, covered with plastic, roast down, all the runoff goes somewhere else. This doesn't seem like a very sustainable land practice.
I think the conversations that we've been having with the regional board to try to bring some of these regulatory conflicts to the surface have been productive. There is a regulatory alignment study that was just happening over the last year and a half or so. And I can't remember the consultancy who was leading that. I believe it was California Department of Food and Agriculture that brought them on board. And they were looking at these conflicting drivers. A big one is food safety versus water quality. Water quality would tell you, vegetated banks, grassed waterways that you're able to kind of slow the flow, infiltrate, take out any contaminants of concern. But food safety would say that's now a vector habitat that you've created adjacent to your field, and you would fail your audit and not be able to sell your crop. So that's a hard kind of line that a grower can't overcome if they couldn't operate their business. One thing that is kind of discussed is there more kind of science-driven standards that can be brought into some of those food safety inspection protocols to say, zero habitat is the only standard, or really what is the driver between what's an acceptable level of risk, which is always a really hard conversation to talk about, because when you're talking about risk for food safety, you're talking about people dying from foodborne outbreaks.
So, I mean, how do organic growers get
away with what?
With this food safety benefits?
So what's going to drive your food safety audit is going to be your buyer. I know who their buyer is would be. Your grocery store chain is going to have their food safety inspector come out and say, are we going to buy your crop?
Well, and also when you think about, there's simple mechanisms in place, like a habitat, like conservation plan or something for kind of a vegetated riparian area. You could maybe incorporate something like that would say, look, like that's a really important mechanism to get in with the right?
Yeah, and there's probably other alternatives that we can think about as well. So NRCS has conservation standards for erosion control and other standards like that aren't vegetative in nature, so wouldn't create habitat. So it's about bringing kind of those resources in, guidance in for that, funding in for that.
I'm very against how, I think that's so interesting, it's like a vector when you think of a lot of on-farm practices are pest control, right? And healthy riparian communities, so to speak, areas that bring in biodiversity and pollinators, not necessarily, but be interested to see what
creating like a rodent habitat or bird.
Thank you. Well, this is the perfect time for a break. In-house, we can keep chatting for 5 minutes. So let's get back at 10:15 for our second presentation. Sound good? Okay, and if anyone has lasting questions in the chat, you can write them in and we'll get them to the right person. Thank you. All right.
Oh, should I be close? Do I need to be
Yeah,
closer?
you can come sit in the chair
Okay.
right here. Okay, we are moving on to our second presentation. Lynn Rodriguez is going to present about new funding that we are awarded. Would you like to?
Yeah.
Here's the camera.
So,
And I'll share your screen.
hi, everyone. Again, I'm Lynn Rodriguez, and there are a couple of quick announcements I want to make about some other things, and they kind of relate to this watershed resilience pilot. So I wanted to just quickly make them. So we have just wrapped up the Disadvantaged Community and Tribal Involvement Grant. That was a many-year project, and the grant expired on June 30th, and we're now working on some final reporting and deliverable completion for the state. I bring this up because this project, I think it's been a big success. We got at least a start in doing more engagement with our tribal members and with our underserved communities. As a reminder, this watershed has two that we were including as part of our outreach and education and engagement, and that was Casita Springs and the Ventura Avenue. And we developed some good relationships in those areas, and we worked really closely with CAUSE, who's our partner in making sure that we reached individual community members, and we had some good turnout at some of our events. So it's exciting because that is actually going to be, it's perfect timing that we're starting this watershed resilience pilot now, because there's an emphasis in that pilot on underserved community engagement and tribal involvement. So just wanted to make that announcement, and stay tuned. You'll get a copy of the final report to look at when it's completed. The task force for our funding area is working on that document right now. Just quickly wanted to say that although we are now fully expended on IRWM grant funds through Prop 1, those projects are moving forward, but we have no money left. And you may have seen that there's a proposition coming on the ballot in November. Started out as SB 867, and it is now Proposition 4. And it's got a safe drinking water component along with energy and climate resilience components. There's $100 million, not as much as we advocated for, but $100 million for IRWM related projects. The state gets to figure out what that looks like and how that will be allocated. But I'll get into this a little bit later. Hopefully we can segue some of the work we do in this pilot into getting some additional funding, not only for this watershed, but for other watersheds. So stay tuned on that. I hope you all go out and vote on November 4th for, or 5th or whatever date is for Prop 4. And then just also to say that we did get one project, DAC project, funded in round 2 of Prop 1, and that was in El Rio. And we had the state came down and Callegas hosted. Callegas Municipal Water District is the grantee for several grants, for the Prop 1 grants and also for the Urban Multi-Benefit Drought Relief grants. And DWR came and hosted a gathering of all the project components in round 2 and the Urban Multi-Benefit Grant Relief projects. And it was a really great event. That was about 3 months ago, I guess. So we're getting some recognition for some of the great work that's going on in this county related to IRWM. And then lastly, my role, I sent out a message, probably most of you received my message about my role shifting from focusing on Watersheds Coalition to this project as project manager. And WCVC is now being managed and overseen by the Callegas Municipal Water District. And so hopefully they'll continue, what we started 20 years ago. For IRWM, and I hope there's a future for IRWM or watershed resilience, as we're going to be talking about. So just to get started, as you can see from the slide, this is a project that's being funded by DWR, but also has involvement with the RCD, which is the grantee, and also this Watershed Council. And we'll talk about what the role of the Watershed Council will be in all of this as we go forward. But before I open up any more, I wanted to give Jamie a opportunity to introduce himself and talk about this for a minute. And then I don't know when Eric Sy from DWR tunes in, he is the project manager for DWR. So Jamie.
Thank you so much, Lynn. I appreciate your introductory remarks. And I want to apologize for not being able to deliver my remarks in person to everybody there. That said, on behalf of the Ventura County Resource Conservation District Board of Directors, as well as the Ventura County Resource Conservation District Watershed Resilience Pilot Program team, I'd just like to thank the council for the opportunity to introduce this pilot program. Also, as lead agency for this pilot program, I'd also like to thank the Department of Water Resources for supporting this effort within our region. And just in general, I'd like to say that our entire team is looking forward to collaborating and coordinating with DWR staff and local and regional partners to identify climate-driven threats and prioritize mitigation pathways to address them. And with that said, now I'd just like to step aside and let our pilot program project lead, Lynn, lead us through an introduction of the pilot program, unless, of course, Eric has some remarks.
I don't think Eric's here yet, but
Not
when
here, okay.
he,
Okay, we'll give him a
It'll show
chance
up
to
when he
introduce
comes.
himself later. Okay, sounds good.
thanks,
All right.
Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie.
Of
Appreciate it.
course, thank you.
Thank you for your willingness to be the grantee. This is a big, it's a 2-year effort and it's a lot of work, and really appreciate the RCD's involvement. Okay. Next slide. So just a couple things I'm going to go through in a relatively short amount of time. We'll have conversations about this process for the next couple of years. So this is just the kickoff, just so that everybody kind of gets an understanding of what we're going to be doing. You'll be hearing a lot more about all of the elements of this project as we move ahead. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview and talk about the elements and goals of the project, the scope of work, which you should have all received a couple days ago. It has some of the details of what we're going to do in each of the tasks, the 12 tasks, and then the overall budget and timeline. So kind of the purpose of this, and if Eric were on, he might add some more, but the purpose of these pilots being funded by the state are to really build stronger networks. We have a really strong network here, so I would say, maybe enhancing our network, assessing climate variability and risks. We've done a little bit of that in the past through the IRWM plan, but we need to update and refresh that, but also consider new threats and new risks. Obviously developing adaptation strategies, building on the ones we've already been implementing, strengthening our vulnerable communities, again, building on what we've already been doing, and then building on the previous efforts like IRWM and the watershed management plan, and also I should say sustainable groundwater management plans, groundwater sustainability. So that's kind of the big purpose of this, and it's across the state, as I will talk about. There's 5 pilots, so we're just one of the regions participating. Next. So kind of the big picture, this is a $10 million state funded project. It is not a bond or grant, it's a grant, but it's a zero match money that came out of the state budget. Unfortunately, there originally was a lot more than $10 million in there, and these pilots we're going to tee up and learn from and be a beta test for a broader effort across the whole state with more funding. And unfortunately, that 2-year budget, all that remained with the state budget being compromised this year with so many shortages, they stripped out the rest of that money, and there's only the 10 million for the pilots. Hopefully, either through Prop 4 or through other, a healthier economy in the next couple of years, we'll be able to recapture some of those funds and use that money for other watersheds to do similar programs. So each pilot has $2 million. So we have $2 million and not quite 2 years left. When we started this process, we had a little more than 2 years, and now, this expires on June 30th. And that means all of the accounting and everything has to be done. So basically, our ending is going to be closer to May or April 30th. We're going to have to be really done with program elements. So as I said, the RCD is accepting the grant and managing it, and will hire subcontractors and consulting firms that are needed to do some of the technical analysis and work. As I said, it was funded in the 22-23 budget, I believe. We are going to closely collaborate, as Jamie mentioned, with the state. The state will actually be our partner in this process rather than just the grantor. They've got lots of great expertise there on climate, on data, on climate, on water budgeting, on water supply. They have a lot of knowledge. And to the extent that we can capture their expertise and their models and their information and work with them, we would be doing that. So that's exciting. And then the other pilots, we had our first kickoff meeting recently with the other 3 pilots, and we'll be able to work with each other. We have fairly different, things are different in these watersheds, and I'll tell you who the others are right now. Haro River, which is maybe the closest to something in our county in terms of, size and makeup. And then you've got the Greater American River Watershed. That's a very large watershed. And then the Russian River Watershed, also a very large watershed. And those 2, American River and Russian River, have been studied extensively in the past. So one of the reasons I'm glad they're doing some different scale and smaller different kinds of watersheds in this study. Calaveras River Watershed, and then our watershed. So those are the 5 watersheds. We're going to learn from each other. I happen to know people in all of those pilots because I work at the statewide level on IRWM, and I see, I have a lot of these people came from IRWM, so I think it's going to be exciting to work with that group. This is a graphic. If Eric were on, he would probably be happy to see it. It's something that appears in the Watershed Resilience Initiative, which is part of the California Water Plan update. I should have also mentioned that this whole program emerged out of the latest update to the California Water Plan. And the 3 kind of pillars of this plan is climate resilience, watershed resilience, and equity. And so there's a whole chapter 5 on, and we're going to be starting to make all of this information available in case you want to learn more about the Watershed Initiative, Watershed Resilience Initiative. It kind of feeds off not only the water plan, but also the statewide water resilience plan. So all these state plans are kind of coming together, and it's now a big part of the state's strategic plan, DWR strategic plan. So this just shows, the complexity of a watershed, all the players, all the parties. IRWM has its own little box down there, but there's, Sigma, and there's fire safe councils, there's tribes, there's land use managers, flood managers, and then all the state agencies on the outside. So this grant is really going to focus, this project is really going to focus on trying to bring all of those players together like we do in this watershed, but in maybe a new way, and find gaps. Who's missing? Who's not at the table now? Maybe we reinvigorate people's interest in the Watershed Council or in just these efforts, because now we have some funding to do some really detailed work on how exactly is are the climate impacts going to need to be addressed. Yes.
Is there a relationship between this and the Ventura River East Stream Flow Program, which also talks about resiliency? Is
Yes.
Kind of step beyond that or supplement to it? Or?
So that came first, right? So there's a lot of good information and data, and some of you have been involved in that. And the RCD is also the grantee for the Wildlife Conservation Board funding for that. So yes, everything we're building on. And I'll get a little bit more into some of the many other things that we're building on. There's just been a lot of good work done. So good question. Yeah. Next slide. So this is the team that Jamie alluded to. So I am going to be the project manager working on sort of overseeing a lot of the parts. There's a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine, and you'll see some of them. And then working with me as a kind of associate project manager, if you want to call her that, is Laura Schellenbarger. Some of you know her, or may know her husband, Peter, who works at the city of Ventura. And he has I don't know. Anyway, so Laura is had previously worked with the County of Ventura in the Watershed Protection District, and was also the coordinator for the Santa Clara River Watershed, like you guys coordinate under the RCD now, but previously it was a county activity. So Laura and I are both part-time managers involved in it. And then we've got also part of the team is both Heidi and Lauren, really excited to have RCD staff working with us on this. And of course, Jamie will be our guide and mentor when needed, and words of wisdom, and she always has a lot to add. So we're really excited. So many of the things we're doing in this, like if you talk about ag and you talk about outreach and education, all the work the RCD does fits right into this pilot. I mean, this is what the RCD does. In some areas, it's a water agency getting the money, or like county getting the money. RCD is the perfect grantee for this and perfect entity to be. I'm sure there'll be other folks at RCD involved too, but that's kind of our team. So why the Ventura River Watershed? I mentioned a little bit earlier about how important it is to have diverse types of watersheds in these kind of studies that the state does. They tend to focus on the bigger ones. So we are a priority watershed for the state. They've been funding a lot of things here. You know, the State Water Resources Control Board, groundwater, surface water interaction study, which just finished. The model is now out. And then CDFW did some work in the watershed related to that. It's all kind of connected to in-stream flow and habitat health. So we have a great head start on all the work that needs to happen in this pilot. And then we got funding obviously for the VRIF project, which is another priority. All the watershed management planning that has been done by the council in the past, you know, we have an excellent watershed management plan that was adopted in 2015, and it needs a refresh. So it's a good, I think that was, they saw that we had that, and this is an opportunity to segue into a watershed resilience planning element of that. As you all know, very active and engaged community here, a lot of good, strong environmental groups and citizen groups, you know, adding to the public entities and the water districts and the others here. Council is very strong. The council started in 2006. So we've had many coordinators over the years, but it started kind of a long time ago under IRWM, kind of under that umbrella, but it's taken on its own life. And thanks to Lorraine Walter, who some of you know, she's the one that wrote the plan with help from you know, many collaborators. You know, that money that we got from Department of Conservation really lifted up what this group has done over the years, implementing the plan. A lot of other studies and research, and we're kind of a microcosm of a lot of issues everywhere. You know, the watershed itself, you know, mountains to sea, diversity. There's a lot of different things going on here. We have a strong ag element, some kind of rural character more than some of the other watersheds, but I think we're a perfect, you know, laboratory, if you will, for studying how this is going to help us and help others in the future. And then we're relatively small as well. So those are some of the things I wanted to highlight. So goals for us, I mean, I think things that we want to see, outcomes that we want to see from this study, and we will get more of your input on this. This is just our first cut at what we want to see. I know updating the plan, I have heard that many, many times in this group and from VRIF participants and others, that plan, as excellent as it is, it doesn't include any real meaningful SGMA element to it, and it doesn't have any real climate resilience and strategies in it. The IRWM plan does, because that came a little bit later. So it's kind of like bringing those things in and adding in some other watershed resilience components. Definitely, we need to expand our understanding about the climate risks, and the state's also interested in having us do a water budget. And there has been a water budget produced in the past that some of you may remember. The Bren School in 2012 or 13 completed a water budget using the WEAP model. There's other projects that have been done that have kind of looked at that issue, but that's going to be one of the more challenging tasks that we take on as a watershed group. And then, you know, just ever deeper engagement with our underserved communities and tribes in the area. So next slide. The benefit right now, or one of the benefits, is we get free money. You know, $2 million is a significant amount of money to do, you know, what they're asking us to do. But it's not enough. I mean, we really have to be careful how we spend that money, because $2 million will go quickly, as you probably know from work that you've done. But it's exciting that we don't have to match that, and we can get a lot of great work done. Reinvigorating the council to rally around this new effort, and maybe creating some new partnerships and new community groups at the table. Okay, so there's 12 elements or 12 tasks, and I'm not going to go into detail on all of them, but I wanted to just quickly share, and you'll get to see this adds to what you've already saw in that master scope of services or scope of work. But obviously the first couple of steps are things we're already doing, identifying and assessing the existing regional networks. We've started that, and we will be sharing that out with all of you so that you can add any that we missed that you think would be significant contributors to the effort. You know, how healthy and active those networks are, significant, you know, including diverse types of groups, not just maybe the same ones you would always think of. And then making sure that we fully engage and identify all the underserved communities, which we were a little bit restrained, not restrained, but in the DACTI grant, we didn't have the capacity to reach out to every, community that might have been identified. We had to narrow our focus a little bit, and so we might broaden that as well. So that task is underway actually right now. Developing the watershed network. In my mind, we start with this group. And the question is, does this group fit the bill? Do we need to create something new? But as a starting point, we're obviously evaluating, the membership in this group and what this group's focus is, and mission, vision, and how would that change in adding kind of the network component that the state envisions. Not everybody has a watershed council like this. I mean, I would say probably a lot of them don't. So we already have a head start because we got funding back in 2010 from Department of Conservation to build this as a stronger network than it was before. So next slide. So tasks 5 and 6, the task 5 is just we self-delineate our area, and we have had conversations about this. We have short time in this. We don't have a lot of time to include the other 2 watersheds in our area, in our county. The state wanted us to look at that. We'll have some conversations around that, but at this point, I think our default expectation is that in order to get everything done, we need to focus in on one watershed. And there's a lot of good information to already be there to inform that. And then developing some updated, we have visions and goals and priorities already established in the watershed management plan and in the RWM plan. We're going to refresh those. So that one, that'll come a little bit later. So this is where you get into the meat of it, assessing vulnerability and risk and the state of the watershed. I'm not going to read all of these. I kind of highlighted some of the points, but what are the key drivers? What's new? What can we learn that we didn't already learn when we had the climatologists, Ina Oakley and Ben Hatchett, who worked with us in 2019 to develop it was really a regional climate projection document. Very robust, I think, because of them, and we got funding from our Resources Legacy Fund to do that work. It's something that we just have something, but we really need to refresh and update that. DWR has a very strong capacity in climate modeling and climate data, so we might be able to get some of it from them. And there's, of course, lots of websites and tools out there that are available to us. So what are the key things that people in our watershed here lose sleep over at night? That came up in some of our small groups that we had around the effort that Nina and Ben were kind of presiding over. We had focus groups about different interest areas. What are people losing sleep over? We have that documented. It's all the things. We sat in this room and went up on white sheets, and some of you participated in that and wrote, what are our key vulnerability areas? And then what are some of the subcategories of that are concerning that we need to focus on? So we're going to build on all of that past stakeholder engagement and input and build on it. And again, this gets a little bit more into quantification of some of these things, qualitative and quantification of vulnerabilities and risks. There's also been some studies recently, and I don't want to get off too much on a tangent, but water quality is part of this. And the State Water Board, the SAFER program, has been looking at and actually has done some risk assessments for underserved communities across the state, and we have several in our county. And so and how climate will impact water quality. Those are some of the data points that we're going to be able to access from different efforts going on in the state. And then we just need to prepare a comprehensive vulnerability and risk assessment report. All of these things end up being deliverables that go into the watershed resilience plan. Adaptation strategies. I think a first starting point is assessing what strategies we're already kind of implementing now and what additional strategies might we be needing as we go forward to address, say, more high heat days or higher flow and flooding days. We're already studying that impact, right? Because it's happening as we speak. So that's going to be an interesting one because it's an ever changing, and fire. Unfortunately, since the last plan, we have a lot more robust, I think, or more fire safe councils and, programs in place. The NGOs, groups like OVLC and, Sierra Club and other groups, I think are engaged more in climate resilience activities and doing just instinctively what makes sense for adaptation. So, but we need to kind of identify those specifically and quantify. And what are the implementation strategies? This gets back to the plan. The watershed management plan has, you may remember, a very long list of projects that everybody, over those years that program was being developed and the plan was being developed, a lot of wish list projects. And a bunch of us have talked about this over the years. We need to refresh that project list and look at more ideas and assess, which one of the things that are already in there are really considered effective strategies for adaptation. So again, looking at what we already have and building on that list, come up with projects and use a very open public forum for that. And I'll just say, talked to Heidi yesterday about what kind of public outreach, how are we going to do some of this? We talked about doing a website, doing engagement, with social media and news media and others, so that this is not a little in a vacuum of a group, that it really has public viewing. And the state wants that to happen, to make sure that we're considering a lot of input. And exciting thing about the DACI program is at the end, we had a really good workshop in Ventura River on the Avenue, which was just 2 years ago now or something. But that was focused on climate resilience, and folks came together and identified, it wasn't just water related. I mean, it had to do with a lot of other factors, climate impacts on the community.
I remember there was a particular workshop on like where people wanted more shade.
Yeah. Hydration, shade, swimming pools. Some of the things people want, are not necessarily doable, but it was a good conversation with anyway, Cause did a really good job running that. It was bilingual and some really good ideas came out of that. The next slide. Task 11 is setting up performance tracking. I don't really need to go into the details on that. That's going to be a job to try to figure out how we're going to monitor and measure all these things going forward. But we have lots of data. I mean, that's one thing about this watershed. There's a ton of data, and more data can be developed. And thank you for the whole VCAL presentation, because that's a huge source of data right there that we're going to have to build on. And the growers are already looking at so many of these things maybe before we do. So it'd be good to work with Farm Bureau and of course the RCD too. And then the last one is developing the plan, which I think we're going to decide that that's going to be the watershed management plan, but I don't want to predetermine that, but I don't see a need to do something separate since we already cover a lot of those bases. Any questions about the elements of the scope before we move on?
Any implementation?
Pardon me?
Any implementation?
Funding for projects? No. This is sort of like the DACI grant was the same way. It was all about engagement and planning and working together and developing ideas for projects, but not actual project funding.
How does this relate to the project? I mean, is that just this also plan?
No, they're doing pilot projects on the ground work. I should let somebody who's more involved in FERIF address that question, but.
That would be
Yeah, she is.
Yeah, because we just haven't heard anything about that. And I thought that was good to actually get some projects on the ground. That's something planned like this.
I would try and get implementation funding for the viewers. I thought that was the next step.
Yeah, Jamie, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the question. I'm glad people are paying attention that Ventura River and Stream Flow project is going on within the watershed. To speak to the question about implementation funds, both the Ventura River and Stream Flow Phase 1 and Phase 2 are both planning. They're both planning grants, so there's no funds for implementation. At best, any quote unquote implementation that was being done would be related to monitoring of those benefits from the practices that are being assessed within the watershed. The goal, of course, of the Ventura River in-stream flow program is to identify those beneficial practices such that they can then get funded. And we have had conversations with various funders to be able to actually get funding for implementation, but we haven't been able to reach the stage of executing an agreement. That said, there are other efforts that aren't directly related to a VRIF that are in fact moving forward on implementation of practices that are spoken to through VRIF. So there is at least that. And hopefully that helped address the question.
And I can chime in too. This is Yvonne from OBLC. You know, some of the VRIF planning efforts that were done have kind of led themselves to really discrete next step projects. So like the Arunda mapping, right, that was a big part of the initial VRIF. That's moving forward and is in. Jamie and I are deep in our permitting phases right now that for our watershed line permits for wind removal. And you know, we have funding from Calpar to do that. I would say one, just like to add on to what Jamie said, and from our perspective of having been a part of the VRIF process, is that and hearing what Lynn's talking about here, VRIF seems really focused on flow, like super focused on flow, whereas this seems to have a really big climate resilient angle to it, right? Like VRIF, it's really focusing on, you know, voluntary tools to, you know, improve our water budget, right? And reduce demand and improve flows. I think from what I'm hearing from Lynn, this sounds a little bit broader in the like kind of resilience narrative of it, right? Really addressing flood and flow and fire, and, you know, more holistically. It seems like in the full plan document, but there's probably a lot of overlap. Good that the RCD is involved with both because we can not duplicate any efforts. I think that's the sense I got from what you presented, Lynn. If I got that wrong.
No, I mean, I think to answer that question that you asked, Paul, is it's not for implementation projects per se, but it's going to tee things up for funding that we hope will come forward. And we're going to keep advocating for that $100 million if the voters approve Prop 4 to be used for things that actually help implement what we identified in our pilots. So, yeah, so do you have another?
My question about whether Prop 4 would give it have an implementation.
It does, it says projects related to IRWM plans, is what it says, but it's pretty vague, and I think the state can, and I don't know if Eric is on yet. No. The state can certainly, because it's so broad, I think they can help influence what those funds are used for. And our job, since we advocate, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Roundtable of Regions for IRWM in the state, we lobbied really hard to get any IRWM money in all of these climate bonds that have been considered over the last 4 years. And finally, this one was successful, and they shrank the 660 million we asked for down to 100 million. There's lots of priorities in the state right now, so we're not the biggest one, but it's something. And we're going to keep pushing for how that $100 million is used. So this, absolutely, we have, I mean, we can get our ideas together, and then once that gets approved by the voters, assuming they approve it, then we have a very short time actually to probably turn around and advocate for how we'd like to see those funds used. So we're going to keep that out there as a source. There's other sources of funding, but yeah. So a couple of more, so just the timeline, we already talked about this. The grant was executed on February 13th of this year, and May 30th is our be done with our work part. And then here's the $2 million and how the budget breaks down. So there's a fairly high project administration element, and that's because so many of the things are related to engaging with, you know, communities and doing, it sounds like administrative work, but and the coordination too is just a lot of people power, you know, getting the groups together and having conversations. But the climate change analysis and all the things related to that is, you know, the biggest single thing on there. And that's where we're likely going to use consultant services to help with some of that assessment and data analysis. So that's our budget.
Question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the water resilience plan or watershed resilience plan that you would likely use the plan that we already have for the big cities CPC. Okay, so would you need that funding?
Wait, I'm
We
sorry.
didn't even do that.
Okay, can you repeat that?
The watershed resilience plan.
Yes.
Is part of this, that you could utilize the plan that already exists, that WCPC.
Well, I'm talking about that this watershed created, the watershed management plan. for
Oh,
the
that would be,
Ventura River.
okay.
Yeah, and there's parts of the IRWM plan that could be brought forward, you know, that were not included, like information about Sigma and information about climate change. We can move those forward, but I would say that the watershed management plan is the best place to, you know, to create. a watershed.
So
So
would you need that? Funding allocation for that? Or you need to
the four,
roll that over?
yeah, that's a good question. That plan, it is out of date. It also, for those of you that, when, those of you that are around then, you know, there was also a significant effort to do really good maps and to do really good formatting. I mean, I know that sounds like that's not important, but, and Lorraine was really good at expending resources efficiently. She did not overspend. We may not need, and, you know, we can always, well, Jamie's listening, but we can amend the grant if needed to put money, you know, move money around a little bit. But I see the amendments to the watershed resilience plan could start early on, you know, sections that we know need to be added. So these things all sort of, you know, they are separate buckets of money, and so we'll have to figure that out. That's a good point. Good point. So this council's role, and we talked about this a little bit internally, is, you know, we don't want to suck up all the energy of this group doing this. Because you have other things, there's other, you know, you have great presentations on things that may or may not fit in to this, but we also want to make sure that this group serves, at least now, unless we create a subcommittee of this group serves as the group, providing oversight and review on things as they go forward. And then any, you know, decision-making, either this group or some other group that's identified by this group to serve that role. Maybe more community engagement. And, you know, when we put together the watershed management plan, there were night meetings more frequently, kind of like workshop meetings where the public can come and weigh in. And I know some of you were at those meetings. So we may have to look at doing things a little differently during this phase to get more public engagement. So that's kind of, I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, what you see the role of this council being and how you would like to participate in the development. Yes.
I got a comment. Generally, it's a watershed resilience pilot project. It seems like our watershed management plan is a pilot project. In a sense, why didn't that work? Or what didn't happen that should have happened? So if we want to build on that with this, I mean, we already had a pilot program in a sense. So why not look back and see, we had that good plan, and what elements of that were funded, why were, what were we missing? Why try to reinvent the wheel on a new pilot program where we've already done it?
That's an excellent point, and that's essentially, as we looked at whether this would be an appropriate watershed, we already have, people can learn from us. So there's a little bit of a balance going on here. It's like, what can we learn? What can we learn about what we did before and inform possible improvements, if you want to call that, or enhancements to what we did before? And then how can we help others who have never done? So documenting what we did before, I think, is a really important thing to do. And we do have all kinds of great information. I'll tell everybody, I reached out to Lorraine to see if she had any interest or time in getting involved in this project, and she regretfully declined, which I was sad about because she did a fantastic job. But she said she's always available to answer questions. So as we go backwards and say, what did we do that we did right, you know, in what we did so far? That is in the past a little bit now. You know, and then how would we, what are the ways that we build on that? The state's vision, that's why they're doing pilots. The state's vision is they want to hear from us how to do it right. So documenting what we did, documenting what we do going forward with their partnership is really the goal of all of this, is working together. So you're making an excellent point. We have done a lot of great things in this watershed, lots of great information. I'm doing it, we're doing a resource inventory of all of the things to share with the state so they can see all of the work that's been done here, and including ongoing things like the adjudication. And, there's a lot of factors that are influencing what happens. The work of groups like, on water quality side, Channel Keeper, and the work of all the NGO, there's so much effort going on, all the work of the water districts, surviving the drought measures, how we've been implementing drought response.
One other observation, it would seem like the budget, the biggest single element of climate risk, and that's the highest uncertainty. It's strange to spend most of the resources on something that's most uncertain, because that would be likely to lead to significant changes. I don't know. I'm just weird.
We spend money or get certain.
Yeah, I mean, find out what the risks are, and then certainty range is huge. Where you focus your attention within that uncertainty range.
All good questions. It was hard to develop this budget. I mean, you can ask Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie has his hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Jamie. We have another question in the chat, but Jamie can talk first.
Thanks, everyone. So yeah, a couple of points I'd like to make. I mean, there is, I guess, initially the sense of reinventing the wheel since there's been so much that's been done. But I would just like to reiterate what Lynn had expressed, which is this is a great opportunity for us to look back at all the efforts that have been made, identify what processes and systems were the most effective, what was most important in driving decisions, so that we can then clarify for other watersheds or other areas, they don't necessarily have to be pinned to a watershed, how they can move forward when they have a lack of resources. So what's the most effective pathway to getting an answer to the question that you may have that's most relevant to your area, I think is part of what we're trying to provide to the state. And with respect to the budget, this is, as Lynn already said, a pilot. We had to develop this budget around what we thought were important issues, and we just had to fill buckets. But the budget is, in my opinion, flexible. So as we need to reallocate, we should be able to work with DWR to be able to accomplish that. But from the outset, it was we had to hit the ground running. We had to develop a budget. We had to get that to DWR to get things executed. You have to keep in mind that with the budget uncertainty, DWR wanted to get ahead of any cuts. They already experienced tremendous cuts, as Lynn alluded to. So we just had to get something in. And that's not just us, that's the other 4 pilots as well. So, we can't allow, one of my favorite sayings, we can't allow perfection to be the enemy of progress. So we just had to get something in, and now here we are. And as we move forward, we'll adaptively manage as we need to. So again, hopefully that helps address some of the questions that were raised, but I'm here to answer any more.
That's great, Jamie. Thank you.
Tom also.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it's also 11 for anyone who has to leave. We'll keep this open for a few more minutes. And if you have a question in the chat and you have to leave, just feel free to send it. Tom, feel free to chime in.
Not being known for brevity, I'll keep this extra quick. Lynn, I'll be happy to follow up with you on any of our prior conversations about what kind of voluntary conservation transactions and in-stream flow material might be relevant to what you're doing.
Great. Appreciate that, Tom. Thank you. I had one follow-up I wanted to say about the development of the watershed management plan. So I had provided to the state some documentation about what's going on in the watershed, and included in that was the Sierra Institute did an analysis of the watershed coordinator funding that we received. And they did a case study on the Ventura River watershed and other case studies. It's a really interesting document, but it did talk a lot about the development of the plan, how it was developed, why it was so robust, I guess, if you will, what were the strengths of it. and the really active engagement of folks all across the watershed during the development of the plan. So that was actually part of a package of stuff that I gave them just to demonstrate what we have done. So that is a resource for us to go back to also. I mean, essentially a document review is a big chunk of time for all of us at this point to learn more going back and then figure out what's missing. Any other, well, and we've already talked about those two things. This is a precursor to hopefully getting, more funding to implement strategies.
If anyone has any lasting input on the role of these meetings that like you would like to see, I would love to hear them. And we obviously have this big project to work on this next year. So any lasting input we will take. And if not right now, please feel free to email us at any time.
And I want these meetings to be interactive, not me sitting up here talking at you. So.
Sure. The same comment that I made during the last 3 planning efforts that were done for the watershed. Any planning should begin with a water budget. And we have a pretty good framework for that with the LEAP model that still exists somewhere out there. And that is a straight budgeting approach as opposed to the groundwater water interaction physical attempt to model the watershed. So that can actually be very beneficial. Ground truthing and checking the groundwater surface water models. So, I think if there was an opportunity to revamp that model and compare that to the results from the other models that the GSA has, the state has, and then somehow be able to actually assess what your most effective strategies would be for enhancing that water budget, whether it is putting more water in the ground or taking less water out of the ground. I think that the end goal should be a list of priority projects actually implement. And that was the intent of the watershed plan. We had a whole list of projects, kind of died on the vine. That's why I was asking on the ag presentation, there's incentive programs to actually get people to change the way that they do things. I don't know, so another $2 million to go into studies and planning. We spent $50 million studying the dam over the last 30 years. The dam's still there. So I'm still here, but we're still studying. I'd like to see some movement towards actually.
I agree wholeheartedly. And just real quick on the water budget, there's 2 staff members at DWR that have expertise in water budgeting. They're gonna convene with us and help us, and we're gonna share all the resources we already have in this county. Prop 50 funded project B1 was a watershed protection plan. It talked about the need for a budget, but it didn't actually do a budget. But the closest thing we have is the Bren project, which were you the overseer on that? You were, right? Yeah.
It didn't cost us $2 million.
No. And so, but also they have a a water budget handbook that they produced in 2020, I think it was, DWR does. So I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more, Paul, about those are the research in there. I'd like your input on that handbook. Like, what do you think of that handbook? And that we can create, like Lorraine did, we can create subgroups that are interested in specific things so that we don't take the time of the whole group. Back to the question about what's the role of the council. There were a lot of very successful subgroups, one on water quality, one on land use. We had different efforts so we could dig deeper. And I know that's an interest of yours, Paul. It has been for a long time. So, we can start sending out notices to folks, we're going to we'll start somewhere, create a group, and then maybe build on some other groups. So that we can get in the weeds on some of this stuff.
Okay, I saw one more element is the California conservation way of life, that's following that, talking about a water budget that has implications for the large water users, if we have more than 2,000 customers. Plan applies with that law, if we go there.
And you're gonna hear a little bit, I think at our next meeting, we ran out of time at this meeting for, the Watershed Progressive is doing a study or being funded for services to do some turf removal in this watershed. And so Regina Hirsch is kind of leading that up. And so she can share more at the next meeting. And it's kind of an add-on to all the great work on turf removal that's been done over the years.
There was one more hand raised in the virtual space. Brian Bondi, if you want to unmute yourself, if you're still there.
Hello, I just, again, Brian Bondi with Upper Ventura River Groundwater Agency. I just wanted to note that the 2 GSAs in the watershed are required to assess their groundwater sustainability plans every 5 years. And that process is going to largely overlap with the timing of this project. So I just wanted to note that I think it creates an interesting opportunity to take a look at both this work as well as potentially updating those GSPs. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Brian. Really helpful. So next step is you're going to start, some of you are going to get letters from us. We're going to do some key partner outreach to start off, and we're going to just work our way through key players. So some of you will get, and actually a lot of you in the room are on our short list to start with. So we'll be doing that. And so stay tuned for some of our upcoming like one-on-ones or, meetings with you.
It looks like Jamie has the last remark. Jamie.
All right. You can have the last word, Jamie.
Thank you. I apologize for keeping everybody just a few moments longer. But to Paul, I just want to express thanks. We really do want to work directly with groups, individuals, so that, again, we can target what's important to those groups, those individuals, so that we can go after the projects that are prioritized for the good of the local and regional area. And to Brian, thank you for noting the overlap in outreach and stuff. And for everyone, I want to make sure to reiterate the collaborative spirit of all of this, because that's how we're going to move forward. But also, one of the things that our team does not want to do is overload the communities with multiple messages and multiple meetings. So to the extent that we can kind of overlap and collaborate on some of this outreach so that we don't hit fatigue among the communities, that would be fantastic. So again, I appreciate the collaborative spirit and working together. So please reach out to Lynn, reach out to myself and the rest of the team if there's a way for us to kind of join forces. So thank you.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Okay. I will end this meeting for today. We look forward to talking to everyone at the next meeting and potentially even sooner. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming, who came to the room.